Imagine waking up, stripped of everything that made you who you are. Your name, gone. Your past, erased. Your dreams, shattered in an instant. You are no longer a person, just a number. A lifeless entry in a system designed to crush you. The walls around you are cold, unfeeling, and unforgiving. The air itself is heavy with despair, thick with the weight of suffering. The sound of distant screams, the shuffle of broken souls, the hollow silence of those who have already given up. This is your reality now. Here, survival is not a test of strength. It's not a battle of intelligence. None of that matters. In this world, only sheer merciless chance decides who lives and who vanishes. One moment, you see a familiar face, a fellow prisoner who has endured beside you. The next moment, they're gone, dragged away into the abyss, never to return. No goodbyes, no explanations, just an empty space where a life once existed. Most people collapse under the weight of such horror. Their minds unravel, their spirits shatter. They stop fighting, stop hoping, stop believing in anything at all. And that's exactly how the system is designed to break you, to make you nothing. But then, there are the few, the ones who refuse, the ones who stand tall even as the world tries to crush them. The ones who endure not just because they want to survive, but because they have something worth surviving for. One man was different. He was thrown into the same nightmare, stripped of the same dignity, forced to endure the same unspeakable horrors, but he refused to break. He didn't just endure, he discovered something that would change not only his fate, but the fate of countless others. A truth so powerful, so deeply human, that it had the power to transform suffering into strength. A discovery that wouldn't just help him survive, but would serve as a key for millions to unlock the meaning of their own lives. His name was Viktor Frankl, and his story is unlike anything you've ever heard. The revelation, who was Viktor Frankl? Before Viktor Frankl became a name that would inspire millions, he was just a boy growing up in early 20th century Vienna, a city alive with ideas, revolution, and endless intellectual debates. This was a time when the greatest minds of psychology, Sigmund Freud, Alfred Adler, were reshaping our understanding of human nature. Philosophers, artists, and scholars filled Vienna's cafes, debating the meaning of life itself. And in the midst of it all was a young Viktor Frankl, curious, restless, and obsessed with a single question: what makes people hold on? When the world collapses around them, when life strips them down to nothing, when suffering feels unbearable, why do some people endure while others let go? For Frankl, psychology wasn't just an academic pursuit, it was deeply personal. As a teenager, he saw despair firsthand. Europe was still reeling from the devastation of World War I. Economies had crumbled. Entire generations were left directionless, questioning the very purpose of existence. Young people in particular were lost. Suicide rates were rising, depression was consuming the minds of the hopeless. Frankl couldn't ignore it. While other teenagers were worrying about school and social status, Frankl was diving into the depths of human suffering, searching for answers. He wasn't content with simply understanding how the mind worked. He wanted to know why people fought to survive, what made life worth living, even in the darkest of times. Determined to find answers, he pursued medicine, specializing in neurology and psychiatry. But unlike many of his peers, he wasn't interested in treating patients like numbers in a study. He wanted to connect with them, to understand not just their minds but their souls. By his early 20s, Frankl was already making an impact. He worked with suicidal students, young people who had lost all hope. But instead of simply analyzing their pain or searching for past trauma, he took a radical approach. When a patient stood before him, ready to give up, he didn't ask, "What happened to you?" He asked, "What is something you still want to do? What is the one thing in your life that makes enduring this pain worth it?" For one, it was a dream of becoming a writer. For another, it was a love they had yet to confess. For some, it was simply knowing that their existence still mattered to someone somewhere. Through these conversations, Frankl began to see a pattern. Those who had a reason, even a small one, were able to endure suffering in ways others could not. Purpose, he realized, was the key to resilience. It was a belief that would soon be tested in the most unimaginable way. Because just as Frankl was beginning to shape his groundbreaking ideas, the world around him was beginning to crumble. The 1930s brought with them the rise of Nazi ideology. Fear seeped into every street, every home, every life. For Jewish intellectuals like Frankl, the walls were closing in. By 1938, Germany had annexed Austria. The once thriving, open-minded city of Vienna was suffocating under the weight of totalitarian rule, and Frankl had a choice. He had an opportunity to flee to America, to continue his research in safety, far from the horrors that were beginning to unfold. But leaving meant abandoning his family. It meant walking away from his patients, many of whom desperately needed him. It meant leaving behind everything he had ever known. In the end, he made a decision. He stayed, and that single choice would lead him down a path of unimaginable suffering. A path that would put his theories to the ultimate test. A path that would push him to the very edge of his humanity. And yet, from the depths of that suffering, he would emerge with an answer. The answer to the very question that had haunted him since his youth. What keeps people from giving up? The ultimate test, the concentration camps. The knock came in the dead of night, sharp, commanding, final. There was no warning, no time to think, no chance to run. Within moments, Viktor Frankl's world collapsed. Armed soldiers stormed in, barking orders, their presence suffocating the air. His home was no longer his. His life was no longer his. He was forced to pack his entire existence into a small bundle, though he knew it wouldn't matter. Everything would be taken anyway. His family stood beside him, his wife, his parents, his brother. They clung to each other, their hands tight, their eyes full of unspoken words. But there was no room for emotion, no mercy. Then the march began. The streets he had once walked as a free man, a doctor, a thinker, now they led him to his fate. Shoved into a train car, he was crammed alongside hundreds of others, bodies pressed together so tightly, breathing became a struggle. The air was thick with sweat, fear, and the unmistakable stench of death. No food, no water, no sense of time. Just the sound of the train wheels grinding against the tracks, carrying them into the abyss. When the doors finally opened, hell revealed itself. Barbed wire, guard towers, the scent of burning flesh in the air, the deafening shouts of officers. This was no prison, it was a factory of death. One by one, the prisoners were separated, men to one side, women and children to the other. Frankl's heart pounded as he watched his wife and mother disappear into the crowd, their figures swallowed by the chaos. He would never see them again. The next moments unfolded like a nightmare. His clothes stripped away, his head shaved, his identity erased. He was no longer Dr. Viktor Frankl, no longer a psychiatrist, no longer a husband or a son. He was prisoner 119,104. His world had been reduced to one simple rule: survive if you can. Every day was a brutal test of endurance. Hunger gnawed at his stomach. The freezing wind cut through his skin. The guards delivered beatings without reason. The weak, the sick, the ones who stumbled, they were discarded like trash. Death was everywhere. In the skeletal figures barely clinging to life. In the smoke rising from the crematorium. In the lifeless bodies left in the dirt. But something caught Frankl's attention. Not everyone gave up. Some prisoners faded into nothingness, their eyes empty, their bodies simply waiting for the inevitable. But others, against all logic, kept going. Why? The discovery, the power of meaning. The answer came to Frankl slowly, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Survival had nothing to do with strength. It wasn't about intelligence, skill, or even luck. It was about purpose. He saw it in the eyes of a father who whispered about seeing his daughter again. In the quiet determination of a scientist who still had unfinished research waiting for him. They had a reason to fight, a future to hold on to. And then Frankl turned inward. If he was to survive, he needed something too. He imagined himself standing in a lecture hall, sharing his discoveries with students, writing a book about what he had learned. The Nazis could take everything from him, but they could never take that. That realization changed everything. He began studying the prisoners, observing their behavior, analyzing their resilience. He watched how those who clung to meaning survived longer, while those who had lost all hope deteriorated quickly. A man who had once been full of life would suddenly stop eating, stop speaking, stop moving. Within days he was gone. But those who held on to even the smallest reason to live, a loved one, a piece of unfinished work, a vision for the future, they endured. The Nazis controlled their bodies, but they did not control their minds. Frankl had discovered something life-changing, and if he lived to tell the world, it could change countless lives. The breakthrough, man's search for meaning. Frankl survived. When the war ended, he walked out of Auschwitz with nothing. His family was gone, his home was gone, everything he had built had been burned to the ground. But one thing remained, his discovery. Life was not unbearable because of suffering, it was unbearable because of a lack of meaning. He had lived through the worst horror imaginable, and yet his belief had kept him alive. Now it was his mission to share it with the world. In just 9 days, he poured his entire experience, his philosophy and his survival, into words. That book became man's search for meaning. It wasn't just a memoir, it was a guide, a map for those lost in their own suffering, a lifeline for people questioning their purpose. And it would go on to change the world. The secret to a meaningful life. How it applies to you. Forget chasing happiness. Frankl's radical idea. Happiness is not the goal, it is a byproduct of meaning. So how do you find meaning? 3 ways. Sullen Loleth. Through work, creating something that matters, dedicating yourself to a purpose. Sullen Loleth. Through love, deep relationships, connection and devotion to others. 3 Sullen Loleth. Through suffering, turning pain into growth and transformation. Pain is inevitable, but the meaning you assign to it changes everything. Think about it. What struggle in your life could shape you into a stronger person? The ultimate human freedom. You may not control what happens to you, but you always control how you respond. Frankl saw it firsthand. In the camps there were 2 types of people, those who gave up, and those who chose to fight for meaning. Which one will you be? Your suffering can be your greatest teacher. Your pain can be your greatest transformation. Meaning isn't something you wait for, it's something you create. So now ask yourself, what choice will you make today?